Yeah, you're gonna need one of these.
So, it's a drinking.
Last one standing wins.
Because today we're talking about 15 of my favorite folk metal albums, starting with Ensephirum and Ensephirum. Bring up the words folk metal, and this Finnish band is always the first that comes to mind for me. I actually had the great pleasure of interviewing current bass player Sammy at the bar before one of their shows, and he was one of the nicest guys I've ever met. As for this album, the neoclassical riffing and raspy snarls of original vocalist and resident madman guitarist Jari Mäenpää are truly unmatched, though these days he may be more well known for his work with Wintersun. Just super fun stuff. You've got absolute slappers and live show mainstays like Hero in a Dream, Token of Time, Guardians of Fate, Windrider, Battle Song, all instant classics. Then there's the barbarian costuming, you've got the additional instrumentation, but even if all you care about is the riffing, they've got you covered. If you ask me, they've got no bad albums, but this debut will always be my favorite. And by the way, most of the bands on this list have a tier list you can check out for their full discography.
I know, it's great, right?
Another!
But next up is Equilibrium with Sagas. This German band is one of my personal favorites overall, with a pretty strong foundation in melodic death metal, but again adding the additional instrumentation and focus on Germanic folklore. Their debut is also fantastic, but they really stepped up the camp on this album with lots of great drinking and partying music. And this was the last album with their original vocalist and their first on Nuclear Blast Records. Not only are there great guitars, but it also has incredible soundtrack quality synth, courtesy of key songwriter Renier, a great balance of fun and pure entertainment value with more atmospheric qualities and ambitious compositions as well. And another band I'd recommend checking the full discography out, as it looks like they're gearing up for another one now with their third vocalist.
He exploded on stage.
Next up is Whispered with Metsutan Songs of the Void. One of the more unique picks on this list for a few reasons. Despite being made up once again of Scandinavian members, they have foregone the usual influence of the region in favor of samurai imagery and Japanese instruments, honing the use of shamisen, shakuhachi, and koto to create a historically epic sound. The album comes roaring out of the gate with Strike and never really lets up from there. I'm also partial to Exile of the Floating World, Kensai, and Victory Grounds Nothing, all of which would be perfect soundtracks for going into battle. And then Shakura Omen and the powerful closing track Blood Red Shores of Enoshima show them as more than capable of carrying longer arrangements as well. Yo, we got plenty of albums left, but if you're enjoying the video, do not forget to hit the like button and share your own favorite folk metal albums down in the comments as we go along. Then we have Skyclad with Prince of the Poverty Line. This UK band are arguably among the earliest progenitors of the genre, formed back in 1990 by members of Sabbath, Satan, and Pariah. This is their top-rated album on Metal Storm and apparently their best-selling to this day. With this one, think more of a traditional heavy metal foundation with a folk paint job. Instruments include both 6 and 12 string guitars, with their melodies and the vocals already doing a lot to carry that folk and pagan spirit, but it's the violin that really gets things going on tracks like Civil War Dance and Sins of Emission. And Kath also provides some absolutely banging keys alongside the hand drums on Land of the Rising Sun. Then we have Moon Sorrow with Voimasta ja Kunniasta. More Finnish pagan folk metal, but from a band that has been through a few phases with their music more and more influenced by progressive bands as the years have gone on. Personally, I love all their albums, and you can check out, again, my tier list for my thoughts on all of them, but I think that this sophomore effort is perhaps the best representation of their more folk elements. It's also much more grandiose than maybe some of the other albums on this list, and takes itself a little bit more seriously. Just such massive scope and bombastic symphonic atmosphere. This is folk metal meant to be blasted from an arena, and the folk instrumentation brings with it plenty of great little hooks that really stick with you from the flutes to the accordion. The main highlights here are probably Sankara Tarina, Kailan Pasa, and Aurinko Yaku, none of which I probably pronounced even close to correctly.
Americans.
Then we have Svartsat with Ravenous Saga. This Danish band has a few albums out that you can choose from, but in my opinion, they never quite recaptured the same magic and quality of this debut. This is in part maybe due to some pretty massive lineup changes that happened right after this album, but regardless, I love the simplicity of it being one of the more stripped back albums on this list. It's basically some extra bouncy melodic death metal, but with an ever-present flute to accompany the already catchy riffs. Think Dethklok making a folk metal song.
Dude, check it out, there's guitar tablature in the back of it.
Just really solid death growls, not too dissimilar from Amon Amarth, but with even more of a drinking music twist. It's the type of music I'd expect to find playing if I stumbled into a dwarves tavern hidden deep in the woods. Next up is Tenger Cavalry with Blood Sacrifice Shaman. This unique take on folk metal was the brainchild of Chinese native Nature Gangan Begal, and over the course of just 9 years, him and his bandmates churned out an insanely prolific 15 albums. Mainly in a style of Mongolian folk metal utilizing traditional Eastern instruments, throat singing, and imagery centered around shamanism and Chinese mythology. I caught wind of this band first in 2015 with Ancient Call, which is another great pick, but this one is a little bit more pure folk. It's almost instrumental. It's focused much more on the throat singing, but the atmosphere. My God, the atmosphere. Just such a different take on the genre, but it really does sort of transcend a lot of things that I've heard, and is just something different from the more Scandinavian and European approach. Really sad that Nature passed away in 2019 at just 29, but his contributions to metal will live on forever. Then we have Heilung with Lifa. Now this one is not really metal per se, but if metal was a term that existed in ancient times before amplifiers and distortion, this is what it would have referred to. Hand drums, clanking bones, throat singing, tribal chanting, flutes, strings, and haunting female cleans in a similar style as Mercure take the listener away to another time and place. There are quite a few projects doing this dark pagan folk kind of sound, but I'd argue that Heilung is the best of the bunch. The atmosphere is unmatched and on the same cinematic scale as movies like The Northman. And speaking of which, they actually did the soundtrack for the upcoming Hellblade 2 game that I hope will eventually come out. Beautiful music that will mesmerize and linger with you long afterwards. I hear they're fantastic live too, and I can't wait to see that for myself. Next up is Korpiklani with Tales Along This Road. This Finnish band formed in the early 90s, originally as Shamani Duo, as just a folk band before going metal and becoming Korpiklani, which translates to Backwoods Clan. The big draw here is the accordion. Juho Kaupinen is a goddamn virtuoso on tracks like Väkirauta. Very fun, upbeat music that, to my ears, actually shares a lot in common with the Celtic tradition you hear in bands like Dropkick Murphys and Flogging Molly. Heavy use of original native Samic music elements and lyrics, it feels like a gypsy hoedown to me. And not in any disparaging kind of way. I want to join in. They've had quite the career with a long list of former members and 14 or so albums depending on how you count them. Again, this was the top rated on Metal Storm with Voice of Wilderness just behind. Then we have Alluviate with Origins. This Swiss folk metal band started in 2002 and very quickly caught up in popularity, with this 2014 album being one of their clear highlights. Another band pretty well grounded in a foundation of melodic death metal, but then greatly expanded outwards by use of everything from bagpipes to hurdy-gurdy. And speaking of Celtic, lyrics reference Celtic mythology here, in particular tales from the former region of Gaul. Just an incredibly lush and gorgeous album that conjures imagery of green, mist-shrouded mountains and windswept hills. I listen to this and feel as if I'm transported to a completely different time and place once again. Sadly, this was also a bit of an end of an era album, with several longtime members leaving afterwards, including hurdy-gurdy player and clean vocalist Anna Murphy.
And like that, he's gone.
Next up is Fintroll with Joktans Tid. This band's name comes from a legend where Swedish priests in Finland were mostly killed by a wild man that they came to refer to as the Fintroll. Interesting group here in that they hail from Helsinki, but most of the lyrics are in Swedish, since singer Katla grew up in the Swedish-speaking minority and felt that the language better suited the trollish identity. The delivery definitely is a bit more in the black metal end of the spectrum, too. More goofy costume antics, with the members donning big fake ears, silly hats, and sometimes corpse paint. Great use of synths, flute, and jaw harp, and once more you gotta love the accordion on this album, with tracks like Slaget vid Blodsalv, Joktans Tid, and Skogens Hamd, seemingly made for a more Renfair-esque kind of mosh pit.
Trolls.
Then we have Managarm with Dodsvard. Managarm is a Swedish metal band centered around a mix of black metal, Viking metal, and folk metal, and named for the Norse mythological wolf. In my opinion, Dodsvard is the peak of their folk metal elements, coming to the front of their sound. Expect lots of time changes, interesting drum fills, anthemic tremolo passages, blast beats, and several clean guitar and string interludes. Fimbolt Trollet in particular is a really cool track, and probably the first I'd play for a new listener. But at just over 30 minutes, this thing makes for a great ride all the way through. There are a few moments where the vocals get on my nerves a little bit, but for the most part, this is another classic that needs to be heard. Then we have Cruachan with 9 Years of Blood. This Irish band out of Dublin has been active since 1992 and is also recognized as one of the founders of the genre. Now, despite their early albums being so foundational, personally I'm a bigger fan when it comes to this 8th album over 20 years into their discography. One of their darker and harsher sounding releases centered around the 1593 to 1603 rebellion against the English that it's named for. Frontman Keith Fay is in top form as always, mixing different vocal styles, delivering on the riffs, and going all in with his tin whistles, mandolin, balzauki, and bodhran. And John Ryan providing a backdrop of hauntingly sorrowful strings in the form of violin, cello, and bowed bass. Arguably the least fun album on this list given the real-life tragedy involved, but once more I want to showcase just how versatile this genre can be.
From darkness, there is light!
Then we have Blodiga Skald with The Undrunken Curse. One of the few new bands to really reignite my love of the genre in a time where good releases are few and far between. Blodiga Skald is an Italian band with The Undrunken Curse, already a clear evolution from the strong foundations of their debut Rune. The death metal vocals and guitars are on par with Equilibrium in their bombast, the instrumentals and feminine vocal interludes also provide increased dynamic range, and the folk instrumentation from the bouncy accordion to the highly evocative strings is more lush than ever. There's even a guest appearance from Keith Fay of Cruachan on the pirate-themed Yo Ho, the Sail is Low. And speaking of which, thematically, this album is all over the place. Vikings, pirates, classical, circus, techno, it's all fair game. Another delicious injection of accordion, fiddle, wenches, and full swinging tankards. And then we have Nocturnal Mortem with Voice of Steel. This Ukrainian band take all the best parts of black metal, folk, and progressive metal and bring them together into the best possible fusion on this album. The approach is somewhat similar to Moonsorrow, making for a far more grand and atmospheric approach, but the result also carries with it many years of honing their black metal craft. The title track is an incredible opening with big lumbering power chords and pounding drums, complemented by actual sounds of steel striking anvil before launching into its infectiously folky flute hook and layers of backing vocals. Ukraine being another personal favorite in a similar style, but if that's not heavy enough for you, there's also the blast beat driven fires of Valkyrie. Either way, this is a real masterpiece. Fair warning, the band has past ties to NSBM if that's something that bothers you, but they publicly disavowed it nearly a decade ago, and at least to my knowledge have shown no signs of it since. Y'all check out this playlist with my rankings of the discographies of several bands on this list, or check out this video for my ranking of debut power metal albums. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.